You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 532.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoors Station, the longest running outdoors podcast in the world. I'm Bob Cartwright, your host, and you're about to listen to the audio which has been extracted from the recent live video stream on YouTube with editor and long-distance lightweight hiker Alex Roddy regarding the new Wanderlust Europe book, edited by him and published by Gestalten Books. Now, this coffee table book is a thing of beauty and packed to the gills with a huge number of European hikes from the shore to the Alps. A success for all parties involved and all the contributors. Now, we go live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time on YouTube and try to touch on a variety of subjects associated with the outdoors, self-powered travel, and meet and chat with fellow enthusiasts. Please do get involved. Visit the outdoorstation.co.uk website and join our newsletter, or subscribe on YouTube and follow any of the various social media accounts on Twitter, on Instagram and Facebook. A great amount of effort is going into creating these streams and trying to make it full of variety and interest. So it would be great if you could share it with your fellow outdoor enthusiasts and help the channel grow. And so, over to my interview with Alex Roddy. Hello and good evening everybody, and welcome once again to another live stream here on the Outdoor Station. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us live. I noticed a few people have popped some comments in the chat room already. We've got Robin from East Lothian. Nice to see you, Robin. We have Smoggy from Brecon, Dave Fowler, and he's looking from South Gloucestershire. And would you believe we have someone from the last of the remaining EU countries, Germany, joining us? That's Roman from Germany, obviously. So welcome, Roman. Welcome, everybody. And welcome, of course, everybody who's watching this live stream, or the recorded version of this live stream after the event. Perhaps you can join us one Wednesday evening. We're trying to do the same every week if we can, every Wednesday. I would also like to welcome people who are listening to this. That's the people that have joined the podcast, because the podcast will be released shortly as well for people that like to commute or do other things while they listen to the content. We've got a great show for you tonight. We're very fortunate to have the editor and writer and well-known outdoor person, Alex Roddy, joining us. Now, you may remember I spoke to Alex some years ago, actually. We've just realised in a podcast number 421 and 422, 2016. Mind you, almost the same time of year, December, which is well worth a listen if you ever want to have a listen to some of his other adventures that he's done. Now, of course, tonight we are joined, as always, by the lovely Rose in the chat room. And she is holding up the book that we're going to be talking about tonight, the Wanderlust book, the new coffee table book from Gestalten Books, edited by Alex. And it is a thing of beauty. And certainly, I don't know if it's a good book or a bad book to have during these COVID times, because it's full of far too much inspiration.
It's absolutely beautiful. I could just spend all my time just looking through here, and just makes you have itchy feet. Even though you can't get out at the moment, it's a good sort of escapism for a few minutes. Cup of tea, cup of coffee. Fantastic.
And of course, you can actually win a copy of the book tonight if you stay tuned to the end of the show, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that as the show progresses. But of course, our guest tonight is Alex Roddy, and welcome, Alex. Nice to see you here.
Hi, Bob. Nice to see you. Thanks for inviting me back.
You're more than welcome. I think 4 years is a reasonable gap to have a double dose of Alex, so we're fine on that score. Now, first of all, I must congratulate you, because I realised you've just recently become editor of Sidetrack magazine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We're just starting to work on the next issue.
So, just a brief question. How do you fit it all in? Because you do an awful lot of writing and an awful lot of walking. How do you manage to get it all in and life as well?
Yeah, well, it can be challenging at times, and increasingly it's down to saying no to things, unfortunately, and just good kind of scheduling skills, I suppose.
Excellent. Okay. Well, tonight we're going to be looking at the Wanderlust book, which you've been editor for or co-editor of. I'm not too sure I've got the title correct, but I'm sure you can fill us in on that. So, would you like to explain to us? I mean, certainly I'm very curious, and I'm sure all the listeners are as well. A book like this, which contains such a wealth of outdoor knowledge and outdoor routes, certainly a very diverse range of routes, from the technical to the what I should say, easy and tongue-in-cheek sort of thing, easy walking routes. How do you go about actually putting something like this together?
Well, it was quite a process, really. It began late last year when Gestalten contacted me out of the blue and said, "Would you be interested in working with us on this new project?" They published several similar books before, mostly with Cam Honan, who's a very, very experienced long-distance hiker. And he had worked with them on the Hidden Tracks and Wanderlust USA, but they wanted to create a similar book about Europe's best trails, mostly long distance trails. And the main criterion was just quality. It wasn't necessarily about the hardest routes. Some of the routes in there are very, very hard, but there's also some relatively straightforward ones as well. And there's also plenty that you might not have heard of. So we really kind of worked on the book as a team. My role was, as you say, co-editor, but I wrote the vast majority of the written content for the book as well. And it was really a massive research project that started with kind of nailing down that list of routes initially, which could be quite challenging at times because we all had different ideas of what we wanted to include, me and the rest of the team at Gestalten. And but in the end, we managed to get a really good spread throughout Europe in the widest possible sense, really. I mean, we've got a couple of routes in Iceland. We've got one on the Canary Islands. So there's a big spread. And we worked on it. It was a collaborative effort. We mostly worked via Evernote, actually. And it was all kind of built up on a very collaborative basis, lots of research, piles of guidebooks everywhere, lots of looking at maps. It was really kind of, it was Wanderlust-inducing stuff, as you allude to, particularly during the pandemic. There was me kind of locked up at home during lockdown, beavering away on this gorgeous project, thinking about all these trails I'd rather be doing.
So, I mean, I don't think you mentioned time. How long does it take to get the genesis of a book like this together?
Well, it was actually a very tightly focused project, really. So we began, I think it was November, they first contacted me, and the vast majority of it was written within 4 months. And I think it's about 60,000 words. And it will really help the fact that it was very structured. So there were lots of incremental deadlines. I knew exactly what I had to do at any given point. This week I was working on this specific project. So I managed to get a really good routine going. I'd mostly work on Wanderlust Europe in the mornings, and I knew exactly how much I had to write. I knew exactly what I had to write, and I would just sit down and write it. So there's kind of no room for writer's block at all. It was, I liked the structured format. That really worked for me.
Probably the best thing to perhaps do, we've looked at some of the pictures there of the project as it came together. Would it be better if I pulled up the slide of the actual routes themselves?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So let's just go through those now then. You can obviously find a list of the routes over on Alex's website, alexroddy.com. And they cover, this is the order in which they're in the book as well. So I'll leave these on the screen for a few seconds. Perhaps you can just say something about each group, if you would, Alex.
Yeah, sure. So Western Europe, of course, is skewed quite heavily in favour of the UK because that's where I live and that's where most of my hiking has been. And in fact, you'll see it skewed quite heavily in favour of Scotland, and partly that's because that's where I think a lot of the best hiking is. But we've also included Ireland as well. There's a route in Northern Ireland, and I couldn't miss out Great Gable in the Lake District, which is, in my opinion, the best hike in the Lake District. Plus also the Three Sisters of Glencoe. Eastern Europe was challenging. That required a lot more research, and there were several trails in that area that are very well known, several that I'd never even heard of before, emphasizing the research aspect, and also the Trans-Caucasian Trail, which is being constructed at the moment. It's a massive effort. So yeah, that was particularly interesting.
Just as a quick aside, I quite fancy the Baltic Coastal Walk. That looked very interesting, and well, walking past around the perimeter of 3 countries.
That's right, yeah, and it's pretty new as well. It's only recently been opened, so a wide variety of coastal landscapes there. Looks absolutely fantastic. Not one for the mountain lovers, but Northern Europe, yeah, there's some absolutely fantastic routes there. I mean, I've done a fair bit of hiking in Norway myself, so I was really keen to include some of these areas. Nordkalotleden, I couldn't really leave that out. That's been one of my greatest sources of inspiration, that route. There's some wonderful photographs from Colin Ibbotson, who's a well-known lightweight long-distance hiker, and also Jotunheimen, which is a fantastic area I've been to a couple of times now. So yeah, Northern Europe, some fantastic routes up there. Southern Europe is quite heavy on the Alps and also the Pyrenees for very good reasons. And we didn't include the Haute Route Pyrenees, which I did last year, because that was actually included in the Hidden Tracks, one of Gestalten's other books. But I've included bits from it, Canigou Traverse, also Pico del Neto, which is one of the high mountains along the route, and also the Mercantour Traverse, which I'll speak about a bit more later on, which is another one of the kind of wildcard options. Not many people are aware of it. Central Europe as well, we've got more routes in the Alps. So Switzerland, the Mettelhorn is an excellent 3,000 meter peak. You won't see it on many of these lists of top hikes in Europe, but I think it is one of the top hikes in the area. Alpine Pass route is quite a well-known long-distance trail across the whole width of Switzerland, plus also several in the Dolomites. And then you've got other ones that are very not well known at all, like the Harz Border Trail, which heads through the Harz Mountains, and there's lots of kind of relics from the Cold War. So yeah, we got a real kind of spread of interest, I think. Oh, I can't hear you, Bob. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, that's mine. Too many buttons. My life is made up of too many buttons. So yes, follow Alex at Instagram and Twitter if you want to. I was going to come on to that a bit later on, but naturally that's a good place to pick up more information. But we're trying to give you as much information as we can in this live stream. So we could carry on talking for a very long time about a lot of these routes, because I think that gives a good overview for people to understand exactly the wide range. As you say, everything from an easy coastal walk through to a lot more challenging routes, but all inspirational. And I have to say, it is, as Rose quite rightly points out, one of those books that you sit down with for 5 minutes and all of a sudden an hour's gone. So congratulations on producing something that's really does whet the appetite. Now, I believe you've got a few stories to tell about certain routes, and one of which is the Cape Wrath. So do you want to pick it up from there? Sure,
yeah. Well, the Cape Wrath Trail was one of those routes that simply had to be in the book. It was my first real long distance trail, kind of multi-week trip. And the map you're seeing now is the map of the route that I took in 2019 for my winter hike. A slightly different route starting at Ardnamurchan Point. The route we've included in the book is the more conventional version. But in 2019, I decided to go and hike it in winter. And I felt quite a sense of apprehension before doing this, because not that many people do it in winter, and it is significantly more difficult. But it was also absolutely wonderful. So this is a photograph from my first Cape Wrath Trail, June 2015, which was a learning experience about lightweight hiking.
Let me just come back to that. So this is a good typical thing. The technical part, we've coming and going with Alex on the Skype. So I'm going to stop the call with Alex and call him back to see if we get a clearer signal. And Rose will chat with you for a second and just explain some of the comments that are coming through on the chat room at the moment. But this is one of the technical joys of live streaming. So here's Rose for a second.
So Light Hiker was saying that for German-speaking countries, this book is also available in the German, because it's obviously Gestalt is based in Germany, so that's really useful to know. Thank you. Mark Jean said, how did they make the decision on the routes? I just don't know. There are so many routes. I mean, that's something we can definitely put back to Alex. Got lots of people joining us today. Martha from Toronto, great. Pam and
are you back with us,
Danny?
Alex?
I'm back. Was there a problem there?
Yes. You disappeared into the digital ether, and sorry, we lost you. It broke up completely. So you were just saying about the picture was from your summer hike, I think it was, or summer Cape Wrath, and then it all broke up after that. So do you want to go back to that one?
That was my first summer trail, and it led me to think, maybe a winter journey would be something I might want to do, particularly Knoydart. You're seeing Knoydart there. It's a very, very wild area. And in February 2019, I set out to hike the Cape Wrath Trail from Ardnamurchan Point, and I saw very, very few hikers. By the time I got to Corryhully Bothy, which is there, and rejoined the standard route of the trail, I was feeling pretty beat up in a way because my tent had been leaking. It was a sample I had on review, and unfortunately just a faulty sample. It does happen sometimes. So I rocked up at the Bothy and had to wait there for a few days for my brother to get my replacement tent and bring it up, and he was going to join me for the walk through Knoydart. And while I was at Corryhully Bothy, which is beneath the mountains above Glenfinnan, which is it's a lovely area, but it's quite near the road, so it's a relatively popular bothy. There was a few guys who came in at the same time. So there was Mike and Lewis. We went up onto the mountains above Glenfinnan one day, and then I think it was the day before that. It was late at night, and this kid comes in. This young guy. It was about probably 10:30 at night, and absolutely soaking wet, streaming with water. He looked exhausted, and he just kind of crashed into the bothy, and he started brewing up, making some super noodles. And he said, I think I'll head on to the next bothy. And one of us said, well, do you know how far it is to the next bothy? And he decided to stay for the night, but it turned out that he was actually hiking Land's End to John O'Groats, and he decided to finish by the Cape Wrath Trail and then along the north coast of Scotland. And this guy had this amazing story. Speaking to him that night, he was kind of pausing when doing his A-levels to hike this incredible long trail, and mostly funding it through an eBay business, actually selling ultralight gear that he'd made himself. And he'd got this far and he was doing incredibly well, but he'd never done any long distance hiking in the Scottish Highlands before, and he didn't really know what was ahead. And I'd seen the weather forecast, and I knew that there was going to be a thaw on and a lot of heavy rain. And so I was a little bit concerned about how he'd do in Knoydart. But anyway, long story short, I kept going with my brother James. Skye went a slightly different way through Knoydart, and I didn't actually see him for, I think it was nearly a week. That's Skye walking off into the distance there at our last meeting. But I met him the next time at Mulbury, which is a very remote bothy, very, very beautiful bothy. I turned up there very late at night. I was exhausted. I was soaked because there's a river crossing right outside the bothy that I'd forgotten about, and I had to wade through it. And I was drying my socks over the stove. And oh no, sorry, it wasn't at Mulbury that I next saw Skye. That's when I saw Skye's entry in the bothy book. It was at the Schoolhouse Bothy. That was it, and that was, I think, quite a number of days after that. And at the schoolhouse, I think it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, I was still asleep, and he came blundering in and woke me up. And basically, we kept leapfrogging each other. So he had told me he was going to do these really, really long days to try and get ahead of his schedule, because he basically had to go and do his exams. But it didn't quite work out, and he had a niggling injury and various gear problems. And for every kind of massive 30-mile day he did, he had to take a much shorter one. Yeah, he was a little bit concerned that he wasn't going to get to Cape Wrath in time, and that the weather would really close in. But he seemed in high spirits, and off we went. And the next time I saw him was at Glencoolbothy in Assynt, and he was knackered. He was absolutely knackered. I got there at about probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was still asleep. He'd had this awful epic descent of the trail down past Isa Cualalwyn, the highest waterfall in the UK, and he'd lost the path, and yeah, he was absolutely exhausted, and I think he was just kind of burning the candle at both ends to try and keep ahead. And we had a bit of a chat and made sure he had enough to eat, and yeah, he was fine. And I last saw him kind of following me at about a mile behind. And yeah, I heard from him after finishing the trail, he completed successfully. He did it. So absolutely amazing achievement. Land's End to John O'Groats in winter via the Cape Wrath Trail, 16 years old.
When you said earlier on he was 16, I mean, that is a heck of an achievement. But gosh, his parents must have been panicking about him, surely.
He told me that they were kind of keeping tabs on him. So he had I think it was an inReach or a Spot, and they knew where he was, and occasionally they'd meet up with him, and he'd check in basically. So yeah, but even so, absolutely amazing achievement.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I have done Cape Wrath in better weather in May time, and that scene there was one of great relief. I seem to remember just going the last 2 or 3 kilometres across such boggy ground. It was really tough going. But I was with Lee at the time. We had to walk from there down to get the ferry or the boat across. Is there a bus running now?
There is a bus that runs sometimes that you can occasionally flag down or get a lift with. But both times I've done it, I've had to walk. And in fact, in winter, the ferry isn't even running across the Kyle. So you have to walk all the way around the back, which adds about, I think, at least 10 miles onto the journey. It's very, very boggy ground. So if you do it in winter, definitely factor that in. You can't get the ferry.
Yes. It's after such an epic trip, there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to get the transport to just make things a bit easier, especially when you can smell the coffee and the chips in Durness. It's not a good feeling. Okay, so that's the Cape Wrath. Now, the Tour of Monte Rosa is another one you want to talk about. What are we doing for time? We're 20 past now. I'll tell people about the competition shortly, but do stay tuned. We'll be releasing the details on how to enter the competition and win a copy of the book. Anywhere in Europe, by the way, it doesn't matter where you're watching from. In Europe, the book will be shipped directly from Gestalten Books. So there's not a problem with that score. So yes, let's talk for a moment about the Monte Rosa.
Yeah, well, the Tour of Monte Rosa is one of the other routes that I was really keen to include. And again, it's a route that you might not necessarily see on list of top hikes in Europe, but it is growing slightly more popular. So on this map, you can see that it's a circular route, and it's roughly equivalent to the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is far more popular, in that it's a circumnavigation. So it actually circumnavigates the Monte Rosa Massif, which is Switzerland's highest peak. It begins in Zermatt, which is one of the hiking and mountaineering centres of the Alps, and it begins by heading north. Now, I did this in 2015, and this was at the kind of time when I was really learning about lightweight hiking. And I had done a lot of hiking and mountaineering in the Alps before, but I'd never really done it on a lightweight basis. So this was the first time where I took what I'd learned on the Cape Wrath Trail and I took it to big mountains, bigger days, much more kind of intimidating terrain. So one of the mistakes that I made was to underestimate the importance of fitness and kind of speed. and kind of overestimate the importance of gear, which is something we can all, be guilty of every now and again. So when I began the Tour of Monte Rosa, it starts on a very high-level trail called the Europaweg, which follows the eastern side of the Zermatt Valley for quite a few miles to Graken. And on the map, it looks relatively straightforward. It's mostly a traverse path. It looks relatively flat, but that's an illusion because it heads into very loose, very exposed, very rocky terrain, and there's an awful lot of up and down. And in 2015, many sections of the path were closed, like you can see in the picture there, due to rockfall. Some of these path closures, I went straight round and walked through and it was fine. But other ones, the path had just been wiped out. So occasionally you'd come across a sign saying, 600 meter descent and 600 meter reascent back up to the trail. And this really, really took a lot of time and sapped a lot of energy. And you can see there these awful wire bridges crossing these chasms. And I've heard it said that the Europaweg is possibly a trail that should never have been built, or it should have been built at a lower elevation. But in any case, I was making very slow progress along this very loose track. The weather was getting gradually worse. There's a bit of cloud coming in, and I got benighted. And it had been years since I've been benighted. And I thought, well, how bad can it be? I've got a tent. But as you can see, the ground is everywhere very, very steep. And I ended up camping, as you can see there, in this absolutely awful position on this edge of this cliff. So what that actually is it was kind of a spur of rock breaking away from the main hillside and poking out into this gully. And that was the only even remotely flat bit of ground I could find for miles. And I had to pitch the tent, that the peg on the other side of the tent was essentially wedged between two boulders hanging over the abyss. And I spent this very uncomfortable night in high winds, actually, with quite a bit of rain, wondering if I was about to roll off the cliff down into the gully. So yeah, that wasn't ideal. Basically, I should have started earlier from Zermatt, and I should have hiked a lot faster, and I should have been fitter. I was a lot less fit in those days than I am now. But things improved, and I got into the swing of it, as you do on a long distance trail. You get used to it. Your hill fitness kind of improves, and it was absolutely fantastic. Particularly once it headed into Italy. There's this great section where it just goes from one valley into the next, over the next pass, down. It was absolutely amazing, and you get to see Monte Rosa from every angle, and it is a gorgeous mountain. From every single side, it's this enormous, sprawling, glaciated massive. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you ever get the chance to hike it.
Well, as you continue the story, you mentioned at the beginning there that it was your transition to doing a trip like this with much lighter gear. Would you just like to expand on that slightly and how the gear performed, and as you come to the end of this particular route, if it was everything that you hoped it to be?
Sure. Well, I mean, for the Tour of Monte Rosa, I was using a lot of the same gear that I carried on the Cape Wrath Trail. So a lot of it was kind of classic, lightweight stuff. So the ULA circuit backpack, which is very well established. I was using a 0 degree RAB sleeping bag, so I hadn't made the transition to quilts at that time. I was hiking trail shoes, even on terrain like that, but I didn't have an ice axe or micro spikes. I did wonder whether or not I needed them, because that right there is actually a glacier descent. It's the Theodule Pass over 3,000 meters. And I was kind of umming and ahhing as to whether or not I actually needed them. And in the end, it was fine. But in other conditions, I may well have needed traction underfoot. But yeah, in general, the gear worked very well. I could have gone a lot lighter, and in subsequent years, I have gone a lot lighter. But at the same time, I still had a reasonable degree of comfort. So I think the only real thing that I ditched after that trip that I didn't need at all were the sandals that I carried, which weighed about 400 grams, and I just never even used them. So that was 400 grams I didn't need to carry at all.
It certainly doesn't look like sandals underfoot.
Not really.
But did you find? I mean, looking at the pictures you got there, those other people were kitted out in more traditional mountain gear, I guess. What was the conversation like between you and them? Were they doubting your equipment for being out there?
Well, as I recall, those guys were actually doing a different route. They were doing the Tour of the Matterhorn, which is more serious and involves more actual alpinism. But yeah, I mean, most of the people that I met on the Tour of Monte Rosa itself were hiking with a more traditional setup. But then again, a lot of them were doing hut touring, which in Switzerland is far more common. With a lightweight tent, you really have to be a bit more stealthy about how you camp, rather like in England and Wales. So yeah, I think at that time it was a bit less common to hike with a relatively lightweight pack in that part of Switzerland.
Okay, well, folks, I think it's about time we announced the competition. We have a copy of the book to give away tonight. It's a very simple competition. All I have here is a basic mobile phone, and all you need to do is text in with your name, your nearest town, if you're obviously in the UK or in Europe somewhere, and obviously the country, just so he knows an idea. And we will ask Alex to randomly pull a number, and we'll choose that text, and we'll contact you back to get the full shipping details. So it's as simple as that. It's just a normal text, no additional charges or fees, just a normal text fee, and the number is there. Rose will repeat the number and put it in the chat room as well, in case you've missed it from the screen. And by all means, enter as many times as you like.
When you sign up for the Outdoor Station newsletter, you have the option to give us feedback on our shows. You also have the opportunity to suggest people of interest you would like to hear more about. You can also suggest UK campsites which you feel may be unique, and cottage manufacturers who would appreciate a little exposure to a wider audience.
The Outdoor Station. Sharing the passion, appreciation, and understanding for the outdoors world.
So let's now move on to the Lochaber Traverse. Is another one that in particular you've got a story to tell. So I've got the map ready for you here. So fire away.
Right. So this one's very special. So this is another one that I argued strongly should be included. It's at the upper level of difficulty compared to a lot of other routes in the book, and it's also relatively short. You know, most people in summer we're looking at 2 to 3 days, in winter potentially 3 days, but it's one of those routes that is the very best of its kind. In my opinion, it's one of the best multi-Monroe mountain traverses on the Scottish mainland, certainly. And it's a route that I have dreamed about for many, many years, pretty much since I started hill walking in Scotland. So right from the beginning, I think I first read about it in Trail magazine, probably at least 15 years ago. And it was billed as kind of the ultimate mountain traverse. And I think there was a photograph, I can't remember who took it, but there was a very evocative photograph looking over the Grey Corries Ridge towards Glen Nevis. And it really kind of stuck in my memory. And the first time that I attempted it was 2006. And a friend of mine from uni and myself, we got on the train, we headed up to Fort William, and we were going to do the Lochaber Traverse in September. And we hiked up along Glen Nevis, so we took that approach. You can also approach from the north via Speen Bridge, but we hiked along Glen Nevis, and we both had massive rucksacks, very, very heavy rucksacks. And yeah, she fell over crossing a river and had a bad ankle injury. So obviously the plan went out the window. We ended up camping, and as night was falling, we were in the bottom of Corrie Rath, which is the base of the Grey Corries Ridge, which is the ridge to the east of Ben Nevis and the Annex. And she said, well, I'm not going anywhere, but you might as well go up a hill. The weather's nice. So I went and did my first Monroe then and there. We just Stoban, the easternmost of the Grey Corries. I could just kind of look out on the rest of the ridge. And I thought, one day I'll be back. And I got to go back in 2008 with the UEA Fell and Mountaineering Club. And we did the Grey Corries Ridge, just the Grey Corries on that trip. And again, I could look over the rest of it and dream about what it would be like to do the whole thing. late 2008, I moved to Scotland. I got a job as a barman at the Clackegg Inn, and there were many trips up onto Ben Nevis, countless trips onto Ben Nevis, but a few of them kind of really kept the dream of the Lochaber Traverse alive. So this right here is in 2009, after I bivouacked at the north face of Alpine, and I woke up to this amazing Alpine glow on the face, climbed an ice route on the wall, topped out on the summit of Alpine, and continued along the western stretch of the Lochaber Traverse over the CMD Arete. So that's on a different day. I think that was November 2008 or 9. That was a very, very windy day. So yeah, lots of visits, lots of trips back, lots of thinking, one day I'll do it. And it eventually happened in March 2016, and it was every bit as good as I thought it would be. But by that point, I wasn't living in Scotland anymore. I'd moved away, and I kind of had this idea that, nothing would ever be the same again. I kind of had this idea that the trips that I remembered so vividly, the kind of winter perfection that I remembered so vividly, that I wouldn't be able to kind of tap into that anymore living away. But yeah, everything came together, and it kind of proved to me that it wasn't all over. I could live far from the mountains, and I could still go off and visit, and when the stars aligned, it would be perfect. And this right here, this was my camp, just beneath the summit of Stobcorrie Clowrig. There was the aurora overnight, Alpine glow over the ridge, and I took my time over it. I camped again beneath the ascent up to Carnmore Jerrig, and that was also another very, very fine camp. And enjoyed the CMD Arete, finished on the summit of Ben Nevis with this amazing temperature inversion. I think you've got a photograph of it somewhere, a temperature inversion from the summit of the Ben.
Before we come on to the temperature inversion, this camp that you've got there was obviously on the lightweight front, on very cold conditions. For people that might be watching this that have never experienced anything like this, that have normally take everything and camp in an enclosed tent with everything, you're obviously just using a bivy bag, possibly underneath the tarp there. And would you have a quilt in that? How comfortable were you for people that would like to experience something like this?
Sure. Well, I was very comfortable. What I will say is that the weather forecast was perfect, so I wouldn't take a setup that light in winter conditions unless I was absolutely convinced that the weather would be suitable for it. So the shelter is actually a poncho tarp by sea to summit, so you can turn it into a poncho for waterproof protection. I didn't, in fact, have a bivy bag at all. I didn't even bother carrying one. So that's just literally a sleeping bag. I had a foam roll mat to insulate me from the snow, and a ground sheet made from an old survival bag. Probably the lightest tarp setup I've ever used, and yeah, I was perfectly comfortable. It wasn't actually as cold as you might think overnight. I think it only got down to about -1 or 2. But yeah, it's just this sublime camp. I woke up to see this temperature inversion over Glen Speen, and the inversion didn't really let up all day. It was just one of those calm, clear days with cloud rippling in the glen below, and kind of eagles riding thermals overhead. And even the following day, the inversion, if anything, it intensified. Yeah, that's looking over the Grey Corries Ridge. You can just see Ben Nevis poking up in the distance, and that is looking over Glen Nevis to Bidgin Nambian in Glencoe. That was one of the peaks that I climbed many times when I lived at the Clackegg, and that photograph appeared in the book as a double-page spread, which I'm quite pleased with because I think it's one of my favourite photos. That right there, that's the technical crux of the route. So this is why in the book I take pains to explain that it is a very advanced route for advanced hikers only. This is a grade 1 snow face, very, very steep, threatened by avalanche risk. That's a very large cornice that's collapsed at some point. There are several possible routes at that point to get up onto Alpine, and they're all quite difficult. But yeah, in the conditions, it was fine. And that's looking over the CMD Arete, which is a famous grade 1 winter route, this beautiful, slender rock ridge that heads all the way out to Ben Nevis. And anyone will tell you it's the best route that kind of mere mortals can take to get to the summit of the Ben. It's not that difficult, but you do have to have a head for heights, particularly in winter.
Yeah,
And there you go.
It
That's
certainly
the
looks
version
like it.
of the summit. Absolutely
Beautiful.
wonderful.
Beautiful. Yeah, if anybody's never seen an inversion, it is a thing of beauty. It's like you've woken up in a different era, isn't it? Somehow, a different place
Oh.
completely. As you can hear, the phone is beeping, and we're getting loads of entries. So by all means, folks, do text in your basic details that's there on the screen at the moment, and we will pull one out of the hat shortly. Now, as we progress through this, in the next 5 or 10 minutes, Alex is quite happy to be answering any specific questions you might have about anything in the book, or some of the routes that he's been discussing, or some of the things he's perhaps learned from taking the leap to going and travelling and hiking great distances using lightweight equipment. Now, what we found out just at the beginning of this conversation before we went live, which I never knew, I thought Alex lived in Scotland. So I'm forever making excuses about not going to Scotland for walking. He lives in Lincolnshire, of all places. So if nothing else, spending 12 hours on a train in these dangerous times is obviously very difficult to do. But no excuses. He's got me out of a really bad excuse now. I don't know what to use anymore. Anyway, we'll carry on with these, and then I think we've got another one to talk about in a second.
For me, that really does epitomise perfection in the Scottish mountains. I'd never had a day like it before, even all the time I lived up there. And to be honest, I've never had a day quite as good since. I've had a few that have come close, particularly this March just past in the Cairngorms. Very, very good trip. But that really was perfection, and it kind of proved to me that if you get things right, you don't have to live amongst the mountains and be on hand. You can live far away, and if you get everything right, you can experience these wonderful conditions, even if it's only kind of once every 10 years.
Okay, so that's the end of that section. Again, here's the details for people who want to enter the competition. And as I say, Alex will be taking questions later on. By all means, if you wouldn't mind putting a capital Q at the beginning of your question, just so it's easier to spot in the chat, which I've got in front of me at the moment, which is popping up on the screen. That makes life easier for Alex. Now, I believe we're going to talk about the Mercantour Traverse. Yeah, is this a particularly tough route, Alex?
I would say this is quite a tough one, yeah. This is at the upper end in terms of how technical it is. There you can see it on the map. It's based around the Mercantour National Park in the south of France, kind of near the border with Italy. And it's a very wild corner of the Maritime Alps. Very, very beautiful corner. The mountains aren't as high as in the Central Alps, so they don't really get much above 3,000 meters. Most of them are lower than that. And the hiking is mostly at around about 2,000 to 2,500 meters. There's not really any glaciers, so it's quite a hiker-friendly area, but it's relatively unfrequented. It's not quiet, but compared to the Central Alps, it's relatively unfrequented. And it was 2 years ago, I was looking for somewhere to go and hike. I wanted a sunny long-distance hike in Europe, and I wanted to go somewhere a little bit different. And by that time, I had really started to refine my lightweight technique. So there you can see some of the gear. Well, that is the, in fact, exact gear loadout that I took on the Mercantour Traverse. So I've got an Astucas synthetic quilt, Astucas Cestrals, that served me very well. Salomon trail shoes, which I'm still using very happily. And that pack is an Atom Packs Prospector. It's a British pack manufacturer based in the Lake District, and that was the very first carbon framed one. And so for me, this took the lightweight learning curve that I'd begun 3 years earlier on the Tour of Monte Rosa, and it really kind of pushed it right to the edge, because I would be heading to much more technical terrain. I'd be having to hike much longer miles. So this is an example of the kind of terrain that the route begins with, and it looks absolutely idyllic, and it pretty much is as idyllic as it looks. The first part of the route goes up onto this big frontier ridge, and it just follows it for 20 odd miles, And at first, it kind of goes in and out of these amazing cirques, following a path that makes use of old access roads for hydro works that were put in, I think, during the war. But then it soon becomes significantly more technical. So it heads right up onto the ridge crest. And my concern with this route right from the beginning would be what happens when the inevitable thunderstorms come in. Because as anyone who's been hiking the Alps knows, this is an occupational hazard. You do get thunderstorms in the summer that come in. They tend to come in the afternoons. And a lot of the time you have escape routes. You'll be able to head lower, or you'll be able to find a hut. But on this route, there weren't really those options at all. There are huts occasionally, but there really aren't any escape routes. Once you're up onto that crest, you're basically committed. And I got clobbered by a thunderstorm. I was able to hear it coming up behind me for several hours, and I just kept hiking faster and faster in the hope that I'd be able to get somewhere where I could have some shelter. And the terrain got more technical. So this ridge, it doesn't look so bad, but it soon steepened. And you've got kind of grade 1 scrambling to begin with over the crest. And then when it got a lot steeper, further up, you're kind of looking at grade 3 scrambling in the mist, and me thinking, have I missed the footpath? So this is definitely one of the more technical routes in the book. And there you have the culmination of my thunderstorm adventure. So I ended up legging it down this corrie with lightning exploding all around me, kind of strafing the ridge, kind of thinking, can I get my tent up before the heavens open? And I just about managed it. There was one place where it was possible to pitch a tent between 2 boulders, right there. And to be honest, it was a terrible pitch, because obviously everyone had pitched their tent there, and the ground was very compacted, very kind of dished down, which, as any ultralighter will tell you, is not a good place to camp, because when it rains, it fills up with water. And I didn't have an inner in my tent. I was used to using the fly sheet, and I didn't even have a bivy bag. It was just a basic plastic ground sheet and my sleeping bag. And the whole thing got flooded, and I got soaked. And it was I loved it, to be honest. It was great fun. After that, the weather improved, and I didn't really have any more serious thunderstorms that affected me high up. For the rest of the trail, you have all these big ups and downs. So this is on the GR52 section, which is the best known section of the trail, and it's absolutely tremendous. Some of the very best hiking I've ever done. These massive mountain landscapes, and you've got these huge passes. One day on the trail, I think I did 3 passes, well over 2,000 meters, and it's just this amazing landscape up and down, kind of scrambling over rocks, snowfields. It's just absolutely wonderful. And it ends at the Mediterranean Sea. So there you can see, heading up to one of the passes, there wasn't quite as much snow as I feared there'd be. The snowfield wasn't continuous at the top, but I packed an ice axe and microspikes this time. I learned my lesson from the Tour of Monte Rosa, and I did use them, and I did need them on other passes. So I was glad I took them. They definitely were worth their weight. And that's the view of Menton, which is a city near Nice on the Mediterranean. So you've got this big change in environment as you head down from the high Alpine, where the weather was a lot more kind of variable and generally colder, and it just gradually got hotter and hotter as you descended towards the Med. The terrain changed, the wildlife changed. You could hear the hum of cicadas in the background, and it just suddenly became very arid. Water became a big problem. Last day there was only one water source, which was a bathtub filled with awful stagnant brown water. So water filter very important on that trail. But it was wonderful. Highly recommend it.
What's the total number of trails in the book itself? The actual complete total.
30 that are written up in big format, so a chapter each, and then there's, I think it's 10 that are the bonus tracks, and they just get shorter mentions.
Right. Okay. And then the other people that have contributed to to the story itself. Would you like to give them a mention at all? Because there's obviously quite a few people that have contributed.
We've got the team at Gestalten. So there's Tatiana, there's Anna, loads of people that have helped out. I'm also indebted to our photographers as well. The photographers have contributed some amazing images. So we've got images from a wealth of different people, including many who'll be familiar, I think, to your viewers. Chris Townsend contributed many images, Colin Ibbotson, particularly for Norway, my brother James Roddy as well. We've got many, many more. We really couldn't have done it without the photographers. That's integral to the whole thing.
Right, okay. Well, we're starting to get towards the end now. So here's the number again, folks, to text. If you're texting from outside the UK, drop the 0. It's just 0044 and then the number. Without the 0 at the beginning of the number. What is it? 07, so just ignore the 0. The phone is pinging quite regularly every few seconds here, so we know we've got quite a few entries, which is great. So while we just wait for the last few entries to come in to win a copy of the book, and as I say, I'll ask Alex to choose a random number in a second, he's going to talk us through another project that he's involved in with Chris Townsend to do with the John Muir Trail, which I'm sure will raise a lot of interest as well. So would you like to tell us a bit more about that, Alex?
Sure. Well, one of the things I wanted to do with this whole project was find a way to make some kind of tangible, good impression on the world. And I feel very strongly about conservation and rewilding. And the John Muir Trust is a charitable organisation that owns a number of areas and mountain landscapes in the UK. And several of the trails that I included in the book, including the Cape Wrath Trail, they actually pass through areas owned by the John Muir Trust. So I thought I would run a fundraiser, and me and Chris Townsend are doing it together. And we're actually auctioning a signed copy of the book, together with a day on the hill with myself and Chris. So we've been on the hill together several times before. It's always great fun walking with Chris. He's absolutely full of amazing stories about mountains all over the world, and also he's very, very knowledgeable about the mountain landscape, about lightweight backpacking, about the history of hiking gear. He's also a trustee of the John Muir Trust, so he knows an awful lot about how the John Muir Trust is protecting these landscapes and safeguarding them for future generations. So if you'd like to help out the John Muir Trust, all proceeds from the auction do go straight to them. I believe Bob will have the link. You'll be able to bid on the auction. I think we've got 16 bidders so far, and it's open into December. So yeah, please bid generously, and thank you.
Okay, Alex, so just bear with me a second. I'm just going to put a couple of pictures on here that hopefully that you can just talk about while I'm trying to do several things at the same time here, which is get some more pictures going. And there are some questions coming in as well, so we're trying to sort the questions out. Right, let me just come back to you for a second while you just tell us a little bit more about John Muir. I'll pull up some pictures. Here we go.
Right. So there you've got, that's Glen Sligahan. And that's my brother James when we hiked the Skye Trail in 2016. Glen Sligahan is one of the areas on Skye that the John Muir Trust own, and it's this wonderfully rough and rugged mountain landscape, absolutely beautiful. I think that's Glen Nevis. So you can see that's looking up onto, I think that is actually Alnwick Beg in the distance, looking towards Ben Nevis itself, which is just hidden. And they're doing great work in Glen Nevis, kind of restoring the forest in the Glen Bottom there. And of course, that features in the Lochaber Traverse. That's Glen Nevis. That's near the Poldhu climbing crags, which any climbers amongst you might recognise. Used to do quite a few routes on there myself when I lived in the area. So you can really see the forest starting to return. Many of Scotland's landscapes, they don't feature as many trees as they used to. That's Loch Corrusk, again on the Skye Trail. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful environment. I don't believe all of the Loch Corrusk Basin is owned by the John Muir Trust, but it's I think it's on the edge of it. But it's one of Scotland's most amazing mountain landscapes for sure.
Last moment to end on the phone. I've got quite a few entries pinging in here at the moment. While I do that, let's just have a look at some of the questions that have come through, if we may. I just need to pull them up first of all. So this one is from Roman in Germany. Beautiful photos. What camera and lenses do you set up? Do you prefer the weight given penalty of a mirrorless full frame? I think he continued the sentence to ask whether you use a phone or a variety of other equipment. So I think he's interested in the equipment you use for photographs.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is actually quite a big question. I mean, I don't really have what I would say is the definitive answer to this, because I think with lightweight hiking, there is always a tension between getting photographs that are good enough quality for what you need and going light. As you say, there is a big weight penalty for mirrorless cameras. So at the moment, I'm using an Olympus EM1 Mark III and a 12 to 40 millimeter lens, which is the heaviest setup I've had for a while. I have experimented with other brands. I do have a terrible habit of changing my mind about the gear I'm using and switching to something else. So last year I was mostly using a Sony A6300 with the standard kit lens, and it's very, very light for a mirrorless camera, and the image quality that you get is acceptable. But ultimately for me, it was the reliability and the handling. So that's why I've gone for a slightly beefier camera. And in fact, the Olympus generally offers much better image quality than the Sony, even though you've got a smaller sensor. So it's all about a balance. I mean, bearing in mind that my requirements, because most of my trips I end up writing about them in magazines or in books, I need to have very high quality images. And I think for most people nowadays, a good smartphone is really all you need. And in fact, there are quite a few images that I've taken with a smartphone in the book, and I think most people wouldn't really notice the difference if asked to choose between them. So yeah, there's no real right or wrong answer.
Wow, just goes to show you technology has moved on so much, hasn't it? In fact, I remember quite clearly the conversation we had in 2016 when we last spoke, and I think you were all about Fuji's then. Fuji
Yeah,
was
I
your
have used several Fujis,
brand.
yeah, as well.
So Dave Fowler's got a question. Which of the countries featured offered the best and worst mapping for hikers? Which offers the best and worst way marking on the trail?
Right, so that's a good question. I would say that here in the UK we have very, very good maps. We have obviously the Ordnance Survey maps, which are excellent. We also have Harvey maps for many of the areas, which are a great alternative. But trail marking is often it's often non-existent depending on the trail itself, and sometimes that's what you want. So with the Cape Wrath Trail, a lot of people love the fact that it's not waymarked. And it's all about kind of navigation and planning it yourself. But if you are looking for trails that are waymarked, the Alpine countries are really, really good. So Switzerland, Italy, and the Alpine regions of France, they tend to have excellent waymarkings. And also, I would say very good mapping as well. So Swiss maps are superb. They're a work of art, the Swiss topo maps. In terms of the worst mapping, I think you're looking at a lot of the Eastern European countries. Some of them do have very good mapping, but for example, Romania, I was mostly having to use open topo maps. And in fact, online open topo maps have been very useful in general during the research process. They're very good, actually.
Lovely. Okay. The next question is from Mark Jan Dielimans. Do you hike or do you do solo trekking or in groups, and what's your choice?
In general, I go solo. I have done hikes before with other people. Generally, if I'm going with other people, it's normally only one other person. So I've done a long distance trail with my brother James. We did the Skye Trail several years ago. When I was on the Cape Wrath Trail last year, I met up with James for a section. I also met up with Chris Townsend for a section. And, I do really like having someone else to hike with occasionally. But in general, I really prefer the kind of sense of solitude of being alone in nature. And that's a big part of why I do it in the first place. I need that kind of the headspace. And that's, really what, for me, being in the mountains is all about. It's a complete reset, chance to, kind of clear your head and clear your thoughts.
Thank you. And finally, from Cam Hikes, question: where did you find was the most welcoming and attracted fellow long distance backpackers?
That's a good question as well. I would love to say the UK, but it's not always the case. Some areas where you get established long distance trails, people are used to the backpackers going through, such as the Pennine Way. But even on the Cape Wrath Trail, I've met people who, while Scottish hospitality is generally excellent, I've met people who didn't really know anything about the people passing through, and sometimes they regard us with suspicion. Whereas Pyrenees, I found incredibly welcoming. So both on the Spanish and French side, people are often very friendly towards long distance hikers passing through. I think there's a great trail culture over there in general, actually, to be honest.
Well, that's super, Alex. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to answer the questions. And thanks everybody for making the questions, writing the questions. Also, thanks to everybody that have entered the competition. Now, what I'd like you to do, Alex, is choose a number between 1 and 36.
17.
Okay, thank you. And while I hunt down for message number 17, perhaps you'd just like to give us an overview of what your actual next trip's going to be.
Okay, right. So next trip, this will be very much dependent on COVID-19 and what happens. But I have a big winter project coming up in February 22 that I've just started to plan, and I'm not ready to announce what it is yet, but a number of my trips next year are going to be recce missions for this. So in the Scottish Highlands, I'm going to be doing journeys into the Cairngorms and other places to kind of check out routes. I did have a route planned for my TGO challenge this year, which is west coast to east coast of Scotland. TGO challenge was cancelled due to the pandemic, and I would love to actually do it this year. Next year, of course. Maybe in May or June, if the world is in a better place by then. We'll see.
Yes, indeed. And also it'd be interesting to see the impact that the COVID's had, obviously, in the rural economy in Scotland, because the TGO does tend to sweep through and share the green pound as much as possible. So we do hope they're all still managing okay. Okay, well, we have a winner. Oh, the phone's just gone on lock. We have a winner, and the winner is Martin, aka Smoggy, and he states, the book looks fantastic and I would love a copy. So Martin, you've just won a copy. So if you would either like to just text me through your shipping details, I'll make sure that gets passed on to Gestalting Books and they will send you a copy forthwith, which would be really good. So final things then, really, just how to follow everybody. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier on, please follow Alex if you haven't already on Instagram and Twitter. Here is quite a conversationalist on these mediums, so that's well worth having a look at some of Alex's links and some of the people he talks with. Of course, we would love you to follow us if you're not following already. So if you're watching this at a later stage and you haven't joined the audience on YouTube or any other social media, please do so. We've got a couple of Facebook pages, the Facebook Live as well as the podcast page. And just a small reminder that we are, in fact, the longest running outdoors podcast in the world. And we've been doing it since 2005. And we've got well over 530 podcasts in the library, which are there with delightful people like Alex as well, and Chris Townsend, all sorts of conversations. And you can find us on all the usual places where you get your quality podcasts. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much indeed, Alex, for your time and this evening. Thank you so much for the work you've done on the book. Thanks to Gestalting Books for giving us a copy to give away, or giving a copy away on our behalf, which is really good. And we can only say that hopefully it won't be another 4 years before we see you again.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Bob. It's been great fun.
Excellent. Okay, well, we look forward to having those trips, and we hope you get a nice winner as well, or somebody that will join you and Chris on the hills. As you say, it could be a day full of conversation and hiking, which it will be full of information, and I'm sure most enjoyable for everybody. So I'll say my farewells. Thanks to everybody that stayed with the stream. Thanks to everybody that's watching the stream after, and please stay tuned and put your name down on the subscriber list so you get to know about future events. So with that, I shall say my farewells. Bye, Alex. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.